Um, I am going to fill some dead air for a few minutes before I give a formal welcome, which is always really awkward just to speak to an audience. But we think we're going to have record numbers tonight for this seminar. So if people are arriving on this Zoom call, it's fantastic to see you all. Fantastic to see people arriving. I can see 150, 160 people in the room. So I think we're going to have a record number tonight. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Brad Elliott. I'm a volunteer trustee with the British Society for Research on Aging, the BSRA. And as part of my remit with the BSRA, I help out with communications, both online and in person. It's my incredible pleasure to welcome everyone tonight and to welcome two speakers to our online public seminar tonight as part of our public seminar series. We have the headline act, if you will, Professor Stephen Harridge from King's, who I'll formally introduce in a minute. And we also have a bonus that we have been teasing for a few days, and we're pleased to see Angela Rippon join us tonight. A bit of background, and I know you're not here to hear me talk. You're here to to hear our two amazing speakers here talk. But a bit of background about the BSRA and who we are and what we do. We are the first charity in the world that we know of whose sole purpose is to understand the biology of aging, how and why things, including us as people, age. We think we were founded around 1939 on a rather auspicious year in history. One thing that happened that year was somewhere around there was our founding. It's our earliest reference to us, making us the oldest charity for aging research. And since then, we've been heavily involved in building the UK as a real global centre of aging biology research. We do a huge amount of work in terms of advocacy for aging research, in terms of understanding aging, building the UK's strength in this area, holding academic conferences, helping develop sciences and scientists in this area. But as well as that, it's incredibly important to us that we're involved in policy, understanding aging for the government, for policymakers, and also reaching out to the public so we can be a voice of reason during turbulent times around aging news, as aging is in the news a lot recently. And one of the things we've come to recognize over recent years of research is that the rate of aging is potentially a modifiable factor. And so that's one of the reasons I'm really pleased to bring out our two speakers tonight. Professor Stephen Harridge will be talking for approximately 40 minutes on how exercise can influence aging. If I was giving a formal academic introduction to Professor Stephen Harridge, I would go on for way too long and talk about his many accomplishments, his prestigious awards, etc. But I think the best way I can embarrass him publicly is to say that his work has substantially influenced mine and how my research is run and how my lab runs, and his approaches and his methodologies, and even the hypothesis he's using to approach aging, as we'll hear about tonight. As a bit of housekeeping for our talk tonight, you've got a chat function on Zoom. And if you have any questions, feel free to pop questions into there. Last time we weren't able to get to all of the questions that we received. And so at the end of tonight's talk, I'll be playing the role of a moderator, if you will, and trying to collate lots of questions down and presenting them to our speakers tonight. So if I don't get to your questions specifically, I apologize in advance, but I'll be trying to present a summary of the questions we're seeing. And the only other caveat I would ask is that we wouldn't be able to ask specific personal medical questions. So that's one thing we do avoid. We can ask the questions about the biology of aging, around aging in general, but we can't answer specific questions about people's health or diagnostics. Finally, if you have any other major things you'd like to reach out to about the BSRA, other things you'd like to know, questions you'd like to ask, or even suggest future speakers or topics, you can always email us, info@bsra.org.uk. And if you enjoy tonight, do feel free to tell your friends, come back to future seminars, and share the good news. And we'd love to see you in future seminars. Our next one is Wednesday, the 3rd of December. We'll have a panel of speakers from pharmaceutical companies, from industry, as well as from research about how we can work together, combined to help understand aging. But that's enough from me. I'm not what you're here to hear tonight. I'll pass from here to Angela, who wants to say a few words at the start of this event about an initiative that she's working on. That's something really exciting and on theme for tonight. Angela, great to hear from you.
you very much indeed, Bradley. Well, as you say, the main person to listen to this evening is going to be the professor because he is the expert on this. But you've given me, I think, 5 minutes just to give you a very personal experience of why I think that your question, can exercise help me age well? It's a no-brainer. Yes, of course it can. And my experience of it is very, very personal. I've been involved particularly with all sorts of exercise, but in particular with dance. And that's what I'm going to just briefly talk about, the importance of dance as an exercise, because all the research that's been done, all the evidence-based material demonstrates that of all the exercises that are available to you, the one that is the best exercise you can do for the health of your mind as well as your body is to dance, because it uses every part of your body simultaneously while you are moving to music. As I say, I've been dancing since I was about 5, one way and another, but I'm a broadcaster. I'm not a professional dancer. But I've had the opportunity of being able to use what is my passion for dance in my profession, in that I've got involved in various different programs with dance one way and another. One of the most interesting, I think, perhaps bearing in mind what Professor Harridge is going to be talking about later, is one that we did in Germany, where they had a university where they had pitted 30 people who danced. The ages were 60 to 90 against 30 people between 60 and 90 who were in a gym. And the thing that connected them was they all had to exercise to the same music. And at the end of 6 months, when every single thing you can imagine was tested on them, their heart rate, the oxygen, the amount that the way their lungs had behaved, the way that their muscles developed. At the end of 6 months, the people who came out the fittest, the strongest, and those who were certainly had benefited more from the exercise they were given were the dancers. And this, I think, I managed to prove myself when some of you may know that I used to present a program called Come Dancing, and about 2 years ago, I was asked to take part in the BBC's Strictly Come Dancing, which meant instead of presenting it, I was actually dancing during the programme with a gentleman called Kai Widrington, who was my partner. I was 79 years old at the time and thought that I might last 2 weeks. I actually managed to dance 12 weeks in total on the programme and ended up in Blackpool. And throughout my time on the programme, for the first time, even though I've done a lot of dance-involved programmes, and people in general, I think, know that I can dance and do dance, it was as if appearing on Strictly and demonstrating the sort of dance I could do at 79 really hit a whole new level of understanding with people who were watching, and the sort of comments that I was getting were absolutely overwhelming, and the word inspirational kept cropping up, which was enormously flattering, but got me thinking, if everyone is saying I'm inspiring them at the age of 79 that you can dance the way that I did on the programme, that there must be a way that I can actually use that profile that I was getting on the programme. So I started a project called Let's Dance. I want to get the nation dancing. And we had a National Day of Dance on March the 2nd this year, and we have another one on March the 8th next year. And we now have something like 50,000 dance teachers throughout the country who, on that day, open their doors and say to people, if you want to dance, if you want to exercise, you want to get fit, you want the best kind of exercise you can possibly do for your mind and your body, see what dance can do for you. Well, we did that, as I say, on March the 2nd this year. We'll be doing it again on March the 8th next year. The point being that they have now introduced a whole load of new people to the way in which exercise can help. And it really does. When I started to do research into setting up Let's Dance, one of the things I discovered was that, for instance, every year on average, people over the age of 60, there 1.6 million of them end up with a really bad fall and end up in hospital. Some of them never ever come out because the fall is so bad, and the effect that that has on their health is such that unfortunately they never recover. That is because as we get older, unless we have done some form of exercise in our lives, and particularly as we get older, we lose our core strength, we lose our balance, and we lose coordination. Dance will give you all of those things. I'm working with Parkinson's UK. Again, dance is making an incredible difference to people with Parkinson's. Again, it helps their balance, their coordination. It helps everything about them. It is, according to the CEO of Parkinson's UK, dance is a miracle when it comes to exercise. On a personal level, I can promise you that by dancing, I am now 81. Yes, I can still do the splits. Yes, I can still do all the things that I did on Strictly. And that is because I have always exercised by dancing. And when I say to young people, why don't you think about dance? Instead of, you may already go to the gym, you may do weights, you may do a park run. And that's fine because any kind of exercise is going to be brilliant for you. But think in terms of making an investment in your well-being pension plan. And whatever you're doing now, will you be able to do it when you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, or 90s? And if you can't, think in terms of dance being the exercise that you do, because that is something that you will be able to do right the way through until you are 90. I think the oldest person we had dancing on March the 2nd this year was 94 years old. So I think your organisation, and I hope that Professor Harridge will talk about this, think in terms when you are young about what you should be doing as you get older in terms of exercise, so that you don't just live well, you can live long and you can live healthily. Because at 81, I still want to be able to do perhaps as well as the things that I did when I was in my 20s, my 30s and my 40s, but I certainly can do most of them. And so, yes, if exercise is going to help you age well, that's what you need to do. You need to exercise so that we can all die young, but as late as possible. Thank you. I have finished. You gave me 5 minutes. I don't talk any longer because I know Stephen wants to talk for at least 40. So
that was
I hope
fantastic.
I've given you a summary of why I dance and why exercise really will make a difference to you as you get older.
It was wonderful words. Thank you so much, Angela. And apologies, Steve, for having to follow such a fantastic summary of a topic area, but I really look forward to your talk. So I'll pass straight to you, Professor Stephen Harridge.
Thanks very much, Brad, and thanks very much, Angela, for really setting the scene beautifully. I don't think there's going to be much I'm going to contradict in what you've just said. So if I can just share my slides, hopefully. Okay. Can you see that, Brad?
Perfect. Looks perfect.
Great. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining. A great pleasure to be here to share some of our work and thoughts on aging and around this question, will exercise slow the rate that I'm aging? That's actually a really difficult and complex question to answer, but hopefully I'm going to have a go at it in a way that's essentially going to agree pretty much with what Angela has just said. But as a scientist, as a non-dancer, slightly different way of addressing this question. First of all, I'm going to acknowledge my friend and collaborator, Professor Norman Lazarus. We've been working for many, many years on all aspects concerning aging research. Norman is in a very interesting position of being not only a scientist and an investigator, but also one of the participants on the study that I'll be presenting to you today, which puts him in a rather unique position and perspective to view aging. Now we can look at different aspects of the media in which we see ourselves. Many times, and I wake up in the mornings and listen to the radio, turn on the TV, and there's some research that has said that we're going to reverse aging. We're going to defy aging, as shown by this piece from The Independent last year. Ozempic and Wegovy, these drugs for weight loss, can supercharge weight loss and even defy aging. Well, what do we mean by this? These are very sort of hyperbolic kind of terms. Are we really defying aging? And of course, Dorian Gray, the picture of Dorian Gray, the famous novel and film where Dorian had a picture of himself which was rapidly aging, but he himself wasn't. It actually turned out rather badly. So we've really got to think about what we really mean by both aging and what we mean in terms of reversing or changing that trajectory. If we look at the demographics of the population I'm just going to move that. There we go. Of the population. We can see, and we're very familiar with these data in the sense that we know the population as a whole is getting older. If we compare the population in 1948, so along this axis, you've got the age group, and here we've got the number of people in thousands in that age group. So here we have those living over 85 years of age, and you fast forward to 2021, you can see that the number of people in all of these ages is increasing. So the shape of this figure is changing. So we're having more and more people living to an older age, which of course is fantastic. When we look at how that changes across the nation, we can see that that is also changing. If we look at the percentage of people who are going to be over 75 by the time we reach 2043, shown by the increasing dark colors here, you can see that again we've got a change in the sense that the population is getting older, people are living longer, but it's not the same throughout each of the regions of the country. So there are many complexities surrounding these data. And if we look even more broadly worldwide, we can see that whilst countries in the dark green, where life expectancy is in the region of 85 years of age, in the sort of the healthiest and most prosperous countries, when we get to Africa, many people are not living to beyond 55. So it's a mixed picture as regards aging and longevity. But I'm not really interested per se in longevity. I'm not interested in lifespan per se. My personal interest in our research is all about health span. So we know that population lifespan has increased. We know more people are living long. We know that the number of centenarians, for example, is increasing year on year. But interestingly, if we look at the world record for longevity, that's still held by Jean Calment from France, who lived to over 122 years. She died in 1997. So that world record has stood for almost 30 years. So whilst more people are living longer, the kind of world record for longevity hasn't really changed. But what we're seeing is that our health span, that period of life where we are essentially disease-free, we're independent, and so on, is not accompanying that longevity. So this Times article from 10 years ago still has resonance. We're all living longer, but to an unhealthy old age. So if we look at the official line here, so this is Chris Whitty's Chief Medical Officer's report from 2023, his Health in an Aging Society report. And actually it was very important, some of the words that he was using in this. It resonated very much with the research programs that we've had over the years. This report is about improving quality of life rather than longevity. To ensure that older age is as healthy, independent and enjoyable as possible into the future, aim to advise on how to extend life further. The focus is on how to maximize independence, minimize the time in ill health, etc. So that really is the driver for our research program. But one of the fundamental questions, of course, is what actually is aging? There are many definitions. I'm using one here: the biological process of decline in physical and mental capacity, increased risk of disease and death over time. Now, we can see in these two pictures it depicted as clocks, and you can see that those clocks are very different. Not all clocks, or indeed aging trajectories, are the same. If we look across biology, of course, we see that longevity markedly differs. If we go and start from rodents, mice may live a couple of years, and as soon as we move up to larger species, up to elephants, tortoise is not quite so large, but go to Greenland sharks up here, these may live up to 500 years. So what is it that differentiates a Greenland shark nearly 500 years from a mouse a couple of years? So many factors go into determining how long a particular species will live. What about human aging? Well, many will say that human aging starts at conception. I'm not going to take that perspective. I'm going to take the perspective of adulthood, when we reach our peak, and then how do we decline? And of course, if we look at sports people, we can really see interesting data. And the data often comes in the form of the financial value of professional sportsmen. I've got pictures here of Novak Djokovic, who's age 38, Carlos Alcaraz, who's 22. Djokovic at 38, many of us would consider that's not an old age at all. He's still a top performer, but he is on the decline. On the rise is Carlos Alcaraz. In fact, many athletes, their careers are usually over by the age of 40. We only have to look at the value of Premiership and elite footballers, how their value declines when they start hitting their mid-30s. And of course, the changes we see in these people are very, very subtle. They're still elite performance, but they're subtle changes in their physiology, meaning that they are actually declining when challenged at this elite level. How do we study aging? Well, we could use different animal models. Fruit flies, for example, are very interesting models to study aging. We can use C. elegans. There are models of, for example, mice which have been genetically modified to accelerate the aging process and to probe different processes. These have the advantage that we can study the full life course, but of course they are not human. Humans are difficult to study across the life course because, of course, we may live up to 100 years, very difficult to study longitudinally. But we have different models in which we may study aging. What you're looking at here on the left are some cells that we've obtained from a muscle biopsy sample and grown these cells up in culture. So we can study processes that are related to aging, such as cellular senescence. There is a disease process, progeria, which has an accelerated aging phenotype. If we are unfortunate enough to be in critical illness, the decline in your body's physiology is so rapid, it can again be viewed as a model of accelerated aging. Whilst Tim Peake, flying on the International Space Station for 6 months, has physiological decline, which may be viewed as an aging process. But I hope I'm going to convince you that whilst these are models, they're not really reflecting human aging per se. If we take a view of the biological hallmarks of aging, this is a rather complex slide, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But what it's basically saying is that if we look across the different levels through the molecules that are existing in our cells, right up through to processes such as cellular senescence, which I mentioned, as well, through to dysbiosis occurring, for example, in our gut microbiome. All of these things come together to be integrated into our whole body physiology. So right from molecules and cells to the whole body systems integration, we are changing as we get older. So I'm a physiologist. So what is physiology? Well, physiology, we like to think of as the science of life. It's the branch of biology that focuses on understanding the mechanisms of living things, from how cells and molecules function to how the whole thing is put together to regulate and determine how our body works. So this perspective of today's talk is from myself being a physiologist. And I just want to sort of set out by having some general thoughts of the way we might approach aging. So aging is clearly associated with and is a cause of physiological decline. Of that there is no doubt. But it does not explain all of the decline in most older people. Humans at any age are highly variable in their levels of function, as evidenced from the noise that I'll show you in cross-sectional studies of aging. Is aging a disease process? Some may argue it is. I do not agree with that. It's certainly associated with an increased prevalence of disease, but in the absence of disease represents a decline in our physiology. Improving function in later life is not reversing aging. This is perhaps a slightly controversial statement, and I'm going to focus a lot of this talk on that particular question. The consequences of deconditioning and or disease processes are the things that are being reversed, not your aging. The other thing that we need to consider when we talk about aging research is, what do we mean by aging research? Our research is trying to understand what are the processes that are underlying our decline as we get older. That's not the same as another branch of aging research, which is targeted at curing disease processes or trying to improve function or health and quality of life in older people. Slightly different questions. These questions aren't research into the biology of aging per se, which is more along the lines of what I've been talking about tonight. And to what extent does the study of typical older people inform us about the biological aging process in humans? We really need to consider very carefully in whom we study. So my prime interest is in skeletal muscle. So I'm going to start off with this first figure here, talking about muscle function. This can be your muscle strength or your muscle power plotted against age. And we have this kind of curve developing. So basically, when we're born and we grow, we reach some kind of peak in early adulthood. And as time progresses, we decline. The amount of force and power we can produce declines. I've added this line, which is a line of a threshold for independence. What this line is saying is there are a certain level of function, a certain amount of force, a certain amount of power that would need to be generated by a muscle, such as your quadriceps, for example, to allow the performance of a simple task, such as rising from a chair, to occur. And you can see there'll come a point where this line is crossed and you can no longer do that independently. Now, of course, many people are just about okay. They may sustain a trip, a fall, they may break a hip, they may contract a disease where they're bedbound for many weeks. Now we're in a trajectory of decline, which is well below that threshold for independence. And many people never recover beyond that. We lose independence. And when we look at the crisis caused by hip fractures, it's an enormous cost both to the individuals themselves. Many people, as in fact Angela mentioned, do not recover from hip fracture. And it costs the NHS a huge amount of money. So what we really want to be doing is moving ourselves and people up and away, up and to the right of where this slope is occurring. So why are we losing this function of our muscles? Well, the prime but not the sole reason is a decline in the muscle tissue mass. So what you're looking at here are a couple of images. This top one here is a magnetic resonance image. So it's essentially taking a picture through the thigh. So what you're looking at is the bone, the femur here. The dark grey material is the muscle, and you've got the subcutaneous fat shown here. And this is from a 31-year-old female. Now we've got an 85-year-old female, not an active 85-year-old female. And you can see a number of things. If you put a tape measure around these two images, they're not hugely different. But when you look inside, you can see not only is there more subcutaneous fat in this example, but you can see the decrease in the amount of muscle tissue and an infiltration of fat and connective tissue. So the muscle quality is declining in addition to the loss of. And if we take samples of muscle and study them under the microscope, shown here, this is a young muscle. We look at 200 or so muscle fibers in cross-section here. It's nice, regularly shaped muscle fibers or individual cells. And this is a particularly nasty example of an older muscle, probably taken from a part of the muscle which is encroaching on that fat and connective tissue border. You can see this swathes of green. The green marks the connective tissue, and you show red here, which is the infiltration of fat. And we can hit a disease process when the decline in function and mass hits certain levels, and that's called sarcopenia, a little like we have when it comes to the loss of muscle bone and muscle bone mineral bone mineral density. So what is the cause of this loss of muscle? Well, there are lots of factors which feed into this particular process, and we're going to touch on a couple very briefly. One is inflammation. This concept of inflammaging, and this idea that many older people are in a chronic state of low-grade inflammation. And it's shown in this example here, where we have two markers of inflammation, IL-6, interleukin-6, and TNF-alpha in the population of healthy but non-active older people compared to a group of young individuals. And you can see that the levels of IL-6 and TNF-alpha are much higher. Another aspect which may play a role in the loss of muscle are changes to our mitochondria. So mitochondria are the organelles in muscle, so inside every cell of the body. And these are the organelles inside our cells which are responsible for utilizing oxygen to help us. It acts as the final electron acceptor in the respiratory chain. But what it basically does is allow us to break down fats and carbohydrates into energy specifically ATP. And I'm not going to go through what these markers of the mitochondria are. Suffice to say that the typical view of aging is that when we compare young versus old, we go from the open bar to the gray bar, everything is declining. Our mitochondria are not functioning as well. So those just two things which are viewed as being contributing factors to the loss of muscle. But one of the things we also need to consider in this investigation into the biology of human aging is who do we study? Many of you may recognize this is Jim Royal from the Royal family. He could be viewed as not being an ideal ager in the sense his lifestyle is not optimal for healthy living. So he's not active, he drinks too much, he smokes, he's highly sedentary, eats a very poor diet. At the other end of the continuum, we've got people like this who are still competitive athletes or competitive cyclists, or indeed competitive dancers. We have this exercise continuum. Now, most and many studies of aging tend to err in this direction. What can we do to improve this situation, these people here? But of course, inactivity is deleterious to our health at any age. And so this inactivity problem contaminates many of our studies of aging. So we need to probably put a health warning on when we assess what we mean by an aging process. So leading into our way of thinking, we need to go back to our evolutionary biology. We evolved as hunter-gatherers. We would run around a lot, we would work physically very hard, and then we'd eat some, not a huge amount of food. That is essentially the genetic blueprint that we still have today. Unfortunately, our lifestyle does not now sit comfortably with that genetic blueprint, as shown by this figure here, where we now have plentiful food and a large amount of inactivity. And we say, well, is this a problem? So, well, let's look at the huge increases we're seeing in cardiovascular disease, in metabolic diseases, and obesity, all relating primarily to this lifestyle change, not to a change in our genetic heritage. So being active, moving is absolutely essential. We were designed to be active. And now I just want to spend a little bit of time because I'm going to use the terms physical activity and exercise. And there are some subtle differences between the two. Physical activity can be defined as any bodily movement produced by the contraction of our muscle that increases energy expenditure. Physical activity generally refers to the subset of physical activity that enhances health. Now, exercise is often viewed as a subcategory of physical activity. So now it is a bit more planned, it's a bit more structured, repetitive and purposive in the sense that the improvement or maintenance of one or more of the components of physical fitness is the objective. So they're both expending energy. This is the key point. So I tend to switch between physical activity and exercise, but there are more subtle definitions between the two. But the key point is it's expending energy, burning calories. So let's look at the elite of the older population. Let's look at world record performances of masters or veteran athletes. So what you're looking at here are two graphs. This is for the 100 meters on the track. This is for 10,000 meters on the track. And if you are a competitor in one of these events, you'll fit within an age category, and they go in 5-year age increments. And this is the world record for each age increment. So we've got that for males and for females. So for here, the men here, you're looking at Usain Bolt's world record here. But what you can see over time is this progressive slowing in performance. People are getting slower in both events. This is the fastest times ever recorded by a human. These are the people training the hardest, eating excellent food, doing absolutely everything possible to optimize their performance, yet it is still progressively and relentlessly declining. And indeed, when we get to around 75 years of age here, excuse me, we can see that there's an acceleration in that decline. And that occurs When we look at other events as well, you can see it occurring in the long distance event, the endurance event of 10,000 meters, but we can also see it in cycling, in rowing, and swimming, and so on. So really interesting data. This is really data that perhaps reflects the trajectory of the physiology of human aging. These are the best performances. And to undertake any of these tasks requires an awful lot of integration of all of your physiological systems. So in our thinking about the biology of human aging, we need to separate out this physical inactivity problem. So Norman and I published a paper a few years ago outlining what we call a set point theory. So the concept here, very simply, is you need to do sufficient exercise to negate the negative effects of inactivity. You're in the green zone shown here. At this point, your health span is optimized. You're going to have health in later life, optimal aging, and hopefully compressed morbidity. Now, people do even more than that. Now, the athletes I've just been describing, these are well above set point. Health span is optimized, assuming there's no overtraining pathologies, but actually the aging trajectory, probably no better functional outcomes because you're a higher level athlete, but actually your aging is essentially as good as it is for the set point. The problem is here in the red zone, where indicated by the sitting individual here, we have insufficient physical activity. Aging now interacts with that negative process. You've now got a compromised health span, uncertain health trajectory, non-optimal aging, and likely extended morbidity. So where is this set point? How much exercise do we need to do? Of course, that's the critical question. And I can't give you a precise answer. It's likely to be different for different individuals. What you've got here are the Chief Medical Officer's guidelines for physical activity for older adults. And you can see it comprises lots of different components, 150 minutes of moderate intensity per week, 75 minutes of vigorous activity, muscle strengthening exercise, balance, flexibility, and so on and so forth. Dance is a great exercise. The key point here being, if we look at the proportion of the people meeting the guidelines for both aerobic and strengthening type of exercise, we can see that that falls with increasing age, such that when we look at people over 75 years of age, around 10% of the population are meeting those guidelines. If that's the set point, probably quite reasonable to be, then 90% of the people are not at set point, they're in the red zone. So we have a problem. So if we want to exclude all of these problems, we need to study people who are in the green zone. So who do we study? Well, back in 2012, we started a project where we viewed the study of cyclists being a pragmatic group of people to study, to investigate as a model of healthy aging being above or set point. So to give an example, as well as meeting some very strict health criteria, the males had to be able to cycle 100 kilometers in under 6.5 hours, and the females 60 kilometers in under 5.5 hours. So this is not trivial entry criteria. But these weren't elite competitors, just people who did a lot of exercise and really enjoyed cycling. So they were very active and likely to be comfortably above the set point. Here's a shock and awe slide just to give you an indication of the kind of things that we measured, a whole host of things that I haven't got time to go into. But one of the things that we did measure was their cardiorespiratory fitness. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time here, partly because I'm pleased with myself for creating this slide. What is your cardiorespiratory fitness? Your cardiorespiratory fitness is the maximum amount of oxygen you can consume during whole body exercise. As a bit of a segue, this is actually a beautiful example of the integrative physiology that we don't even think about. So the left-hand side here, what you're looking at, this little cartoon, indicates within inside each of your muscle fibers, these are the molecular motors utilizing the fuel ATP, which we derive from fats and carbohydrates and proteins, that produce force and movement. Everything we do, you're using this at the moment just by sitting upright, just by breathing. All these motors are being used. And they're, of course, located within our muscle. But we need oxygen to fuel that. So we have to inspire oxygen from the atmosphere. We have to deliver that oxygenated blood via the cardiovascular system, through the heart, through the blood vessels, ultimately to ourselves, to the mitochondria. We produce carbon dioxide as a byproduct. We need to get rid of that. So we excrete carbon dioxide from the cells. It comes through the venous side, and we expire our CO2. We don't think of that, but every time we undertake any kind of exercise, you're going from a seated position to walking up some stairs. The demand for oxygen goes up quite markedly in your muscle mitochondria, but you think nothing more of breathing more. Your heart rate goes up, your cardiac output goes up, and your CO2 production goes up. So all of these things happen without us thinking. It's beautifully matched. The production of ATP in the muscle is beautifully matched ultimately by the amount of oxygen that we can consume and by the amount of carbon dioxide we can produce. We don't even think about it, but it's a really complex integrative physiological system. Now, we tend to think of VO2 max. It relates to endurance performance. It does. So if we look at Mo Farah will have a particularly high VO2 max. Usain Bolt, the sprinter, not necessarily a particularly high VO2 max, not designed. In fact, he doesn't need to breathe. He could run a world record performance for 10 seconds whilst holding his breath. But that's how we've traditionally viewed as a VO2 max as important. But it's actually an incredibly important measure from a public health perspective. And what you're looking at now is quite a complicated graph, but I just want you to focus on the blue line here. What we've got on the left axis here is your risk of all-cause mortality. What this shows that as your VO2 max, shown in the blue line, so cardiorespiratory fitness, declines, your risk of dying, your risk of all-cause mortality also falls. Your moderate to vigorous physical activity, which is pretty closely related to your VO2 max, as that falls, or as that increases, so does your risk of all-cause mortality. Conversely, the more time you spend just sitting, so does your risk of all-cause mortality increase. So this measure of cardiorespiratory VO2 max is actually a really, really critical measure for public health. So this is what we measured in the cyclists on a cyclogometer. So here is Norman having his VO2 max measured. And what you see here is VO2 max, litres of oxygen consumed per minute. And you've got these triangles here, which are the male participants, the females, the closed circles here. Our cyclists were aged between 55 and just under 80 years of age. And you can see that there's a nice relationship. As we get older, VO2 max declines. Well, that's not particularly special. Don't we already know that? We kind of know that. What's unique about this study is the fact that the older individuals here were undertaking as much exercise here, and they were just as healthy. So it's a very fair comparison. The only thing really different about these individuals is their age. Now, the traditional way we express these data is not litres per minute. We normalize it to body mass, and that's shown here. And what you can see, the males and females have come closer together. The data is a little bit more noisy. But what I want to show you is the key point here. This red slope is a slope derived from another study, a big meta-analysis from lots and lots of different studies of sedentary males of different ages. So let's, for fun, take an 80-year-old cyclist and see where they hit the sedentary curve. Age 45. So in other words, for the same functional level, an 85-year-old cyclist has the same VO2 max as a 45-year-old sedentary individual. So we could look at this and say, well, this is fantastic. Well, that's a 35-year functional advantage. Are these exercises amazing? That is one way of looking at it. The perspective I want to put on it is slightly different. It's a 35-year functional disadvantage for sedentary individuals. In other words, from a biological perspective, these people are doing what they should be doing. These people are not doing what they're doing. It's not that these people are really good, it's that these people are really bad. That's why it's a 35-year functional disadvantage. So to produce that, lots of systems have to be in place and functioning well. Let's look at the muscle as one example. Here we've got muscle biopsy samples taken from 55-year-old participant up to a 79-year-old participant. Actually, the muscles were in really remarkable condition. Things that we might typically see associated. I showed a very extreme example of a very poor older muscle earlier on in the talk. These muscles were nowhere near that at all. And in fact, when we look at an MRI of a whole muscle, so this is what I showed you earlier, but now this is from an 83-year-old master cyclist, you can see this is actually great looking muscle. If we look at a couple of these hallmarks of aging, which I mentioned at the beginning, we talked about inflammation and we talked about mitochondria. Let's just revisit those in the context of exercises. So these are the inflammation data I showed you, with the older being higher than the young across these two indices. But when we added the master cyclists in, we can clearly see that they were nowhere near the level of inflammation compared to the non-active, albeit healthy, non-active older people. Still a little bit higher than the young, but nowhere near. So a marked amelioration of this inflammation. So this term inflammaging could in fact be termed inactivity. Let's look at the mitochondria again. So these are the mitochondria. I showed you this slide a little bit earlier, going from the open bars here to the gray bars here in various measures of mitochondrial function. Now, it just so happens in that study, this is not our study, the group in Italy undertook this work. They had a group of highly active individuals as well, sportsmen seniors as they termed it here. Now look at the red bars. The red bars are not only greater than the grey bars, but they're also tending towards being greater than the open bars. In other words, tending to be better than the young. So our interpretation or our understanding of aging could be completely, or is completely determined by the type of person that we study. If we study an inactive older person, all this mitochondria is going down. We study active people, well, maybe mitochondrial function is improving as a function of age. It's totally dependent on whom we study. Now, of course, this study is lacking one key group by comparison, and that is a group of young sports individuals. And I'll come to that in a second. Another point I want to make, which is really important when we consider aging, is how we look at the data. So you can see already that there's quite a lot of noise. There's sort of scatter around these lines. What I've done to make it particularly fair to females is normalized our data not to whole body mass, but to fat-free mass. And you can see now our cyclist with the highest VO2 max at the young end is a female, and at the high end is also a female. So that's one point of this data. The other point is to look at the data in a different way. So let's create a bandwidth of function here. So I'm replotting that data set. Now we've got age on the y-axis and we've got VO2 max on the x-axis here. Now the red lines here are shown here. So the point of showing, just replotting this data, is to emphasize, actually you could have pretty much the same level of function in terms of VO2 max and be aged anywhere between 55 and nearly 75. But the point being, as human beings, we do differ in our levels of function, and it's quite natural to differ in our levels of function at any age. Really important point. So the other important point is, because of this variability, what we really want to do is not study cross-sectionally, which we're doing here. So in other words, we're studying individuals of different ages when we measure them at the same time. What we ideally want to do is study the same individual over time. That's much more challenging to do. But fortunately, we were enough to have received some funding from the Aging Biology Foundation to undertake this research. We put a new research team together at King's in collaboration with Professor Janet Lord and Harry Dougal from the University of Birmingham. And I'm aware that Janet spoke in the previous talk, so capturing all the immunological aspects of our study. And what we did in that study design was recontacted all of the participants to invite them back for retesting. So this was after 9 years of active aging. So we contacted the 125 participants that originally took part, and 8 of those 82 came back to the laboratory for testing. We measured everything again. And these are preliminary data that I'm going to show you now. I'm just going to focus on VO2 max, or it's called VO2 peak here. So what you're looking at now is an individual. So this individual, the triangle here, so the triangles are males, shows the decline over 9 years. This is a decline in the female over 9 years. And you can see that the general trajectory is pretty much the same for everybody. On average, it was about a 20% decline over 9 years in this active aging. So they're still active, they're still leading a very healthy lifestyle, but they are declining. This is true biological aging, not impacted by inactivity processes. Now, how do these compare? What does that mean? We're all declining, but let's put it into some context. So what we've got here is the data after 9 years plotted against these two lines. So these lines, these are the 90th percentile, in other words, the top 10% values for males and for females against this reference population standard from the United States. 52 out of 53 of the male participants were in the top 10%, and 29 out of 29 of the female participants were in the top 10%. So yes, they are still declining, but the key point being that their level of function for their age was still really, really good. Lots of other things have come out from the study. We undertook a DEXA scan. So a DEXA allows us to look at bone mineral density. It also allows us to look at body composition. Interesting findings from that study. When we looked at body mass, it hadn't really changed. So people still weighed the same pretty much, about 69 kilos on average between baseline and 9 years. But when we looked through the DEXA scan, which allows us to divide the lean tissue mass, primarily muscle, we saw a significant decline in lean tissue mass, a significant increase in fat mass, and a significant increase in body fat percentage. That's even in these individuals that are still exercising. So this is not an inactivity related problem. This seems to be a biological aging effect because we're doing all of the right things to try and maintain our physiology. What are the mechanisms that are driving this change? We don't know. But there are functional implications for that. So I'm showing you just a couple of muscle function tests that we did. We measured explosive cycling, how quickly you could sprint on this bike to measure power. That changed by on average about 7% over the 9 years. We measured the static or isometric strength of the quadriceps. That declined on average about 6%. But when we then normalized that, in other words, we divided it by fat-free mass, in other words, we normalized it, accounted for the loss of muscle tissue, we could see both in cycle power and strength, there was no change. Okay, I'm very conscious of time, so I'm going to speed up a little. Very quickly, another way of which we want to study aging is to think about what are factors which are definitely affected by aging and what are affected by inactivity. So here what we have are 4 categories, A, B, and C. Category A is something that's solely dependent upon aging. Your maximum heart rate declines irrespective of what you do. Category B is factors that are affected by age but are also malleable by exercise. Category C, unaffected by age but malleable by exercise. And category D, affected by neither age or exercise. These are your health markers, your blood glucose, for example. And these feed into our trajectory of exercise or, exercise giving you a healthy aging phenotype or inactivity leading to a diseased phenotype. So we've put together this very complex program of research where we've used our cyclists as one cohort of active older people. We've got a group of healthy but non-exercising older people, young cyclists and young non-exercisers. And we've measured a whole plethora of things to demonstrate category A, maximum heart rate, purely dependent on age, as is your eyes closed standing balance. We can talk about that. But here we've clearly differentiated between the cardiorespiratory fitness between 3 groups. So we've got a category B, affected by age, going from young to old, but also affected massively by exercise. So in addition to all of the physiology, we've taken numerous tissue samples that we're doing some very detailed molecular and cellular analysis on, from the blood, from the muscle, from biopsies of skin, and fat with our new collaborators in the University of St. Louis with Dr. Maxim Artyomov. Give you just an example. Here we have some very nice, pretty pictures showing how the muscle evaluation is changing when we compare a non-exerciser to an older cyclist, both over 80 years of age. Exercise is medicine. I've talked about exercise in the context of facilitating optimal aging. Exercise is also medicine as a therapeutic. It's an intervention to treat disease. So these two things are really quite different. If we look at the International Space Station, they're using exercise as a therapeutic. This is the magic pill that NASA astronauts are taking. They're exercising to try and maintain their physiology. If we look at the treatment for sarcopenia, the best treatment for muscle loss and weakness is resistance exercise. There are no approved drugs for this. So does exercise or master athlete prevent or reverse aging? Well, it's not that it's preventing or reversing aging. If you're a non-exerciser and you start undertaking an exercise program, you have the capacity to adapt. You can move to a new slope, but you'll have a similar rate of decline. But that's important. You're moving yourself up and to the right of this curve. I'm going to skip these concluding thoughts and finally come up with this. Will exercise slow the rate that I'm aging? And I've replaced that with the word declining, because there are too many complications around the term aging. I think I can summarize. If you are already an exerciser and all the other key lifestyle factors in place, you are already on an optimal but downward trajectory, but you will have age-appropriate function. If you are not an exerciser, then undertaking exercise will improve your physiology and improve those elements where the decline is caused by disuse and disease and which interact with aging processes. So you have the potential to move to a new and better trajectory of decline because you're still aging. So conclusion is Dame Sally Davies' words: if physical activity or a drug, we talk about it as a miracle cure. So with that, I will just put this acknowledgement slide for all those individuals who have collaborated and helped produce the data I've presented today, conscious of time. So thank you very much, and I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Stephen Harridge. It's a fantastic talk. Really interesting data and a really interesting points on what aging is and isn't. I like your idea around decline versus aging. It's a lot for people to think about. We've got some questions trickling into the question box. If you do have any questions for either of our speakers today, Professor Harridge has agreed to take questions for about 10 minutes or so. I think Angela said she might also be interested in taking some questions, and I'll moderate them and ask some to one person, some to both. And as those questions come in, I'm going to start off with a general one that I get asked a lot, and I'm sure Professor Harridge, you get asked a lot as well. So you say exercise is good for you, and there's a few versions of this question in the chat. Is any specific types better or worse, or is it all good for people?
That's a really great question. And I think Angela has come down firmly on the side of dancing being the best exercise. And it's great exercise. Every type of exercise you do targets something quite different. If you just do high resistance exercise, that's the best exercise for your muscle and your muscle mass. If you're going to do long distance cycling or long distance running, that is the best for your cardiorespiratory system. Exercise like dance is fantastic because that integrates lots of different components, including great balance, flexibility, and so on. So there's not one bit of exercise really that really captures absolutely everything. So
yes, there is. And it is dance. And so it is dance. Dance, if you know Daisy Fancourt, and I'm sure you do know Daisy Fancourt and the work that she has done in this area, as she says, dance is the one exercise that utilizes every part of the body in one simultaneous exercise. You cannot dance without using every single part of your body, literally from your toes through your ankles, your knees, your hips, your back, your shoulders, your arms, your head, your neck. Every bit of you acts simultaneously, and there is no other exercise you can possibly do that incorporates all of those movements in one single workout. That is why and Daisy Fancourt has recently finished a new book, which I think is being published in January, where at the end she has, I think the book runs to nearly 400 pages. 100 pages of it at the end is all the evidence-based material towards the way in which the arts in general, in other words, we're talking about other things like drama and music and singing, which will certainly help the brain, but where dance in particular actually really does have an incredible impact on the body. And there are 100 pages of some of the 30,000 pieces of evidence-based material that backs that up. And so, Stephen, you're right. Every kind of exercise is good for you. Whatever you do, whatever an exercise is, it's good for you. But dance actually is the one that incorporates absolutely everything. And can I just add one thing? I don't know if any of you will have ever heard of a lady called Eileen Fowler. She was the lady who, during the 1940s, during the Second World War, was helping people at home via radio to keep fit. And into the 50s and 60s, she was a real mover and shaker in the exercise movement. And this is not just about dance, this is about exercise in general. I interviewed her when I was a 21-year-old young reporter. And she bounced into our studio. She was in her 60s then. She died when she was in her 90s, but she was in her 60s when I interviewed her. And she said something quite profound, which in a way sums up almost everything that you've been talking about, Stephen. She said, what you have to remember, Angela, is that the body is a machine. And like any machine, it has thousands, if not millions, of moving parts. And like any machine, if you don't keep those parts moving, they will seize up. Whether it's a car, a lawnmower, a pair of scissors, or whatever, they will rust, they will seize up. And that's exactly what happens to the body. But if you keep everything moving, if you keep everything well oiled, and you keep everything mobile, it will actually ensure that you can keep the machine working well, your body working well into your 80s and your 90s. And that's a piece of evidence that I have never, ever forgotten. And I think that it applies. If you want to do a park run, that's great. If you want to go to a gym, that's great. If you want to do something that will use every part of your body simultaneously and at the same time have a lot of fun while you're exercising, I've never seen anyone come off a cross trainer, sweating in their lycra, laughing their heads off, saying that was fun, but you come out of a dance class doing that. And it's great for your brain as well. So that's why I rest my case when I say everything you have said, Stephen, has been absolutely fascinating. I've been sitting here making notes all the way through your presentation. But I still come out and say, if you really, really want to be fit well into your 90s, dance.
I can see you're very much on the fence there about dance, Angela. But yes, I agree. It's a really good form of exercise, and we could argue the benefits of lots of other types as well. But I think the key point, and I think where dance will attract many people who don't like the running, the cycling, the going to the gym, and many people do like those activities and would prefer to do them rather than dance. But it also opens up a whole new way of exercising for people who don't want to go to the gym.
Yes.
And so I'm not coming down on the side of anything other than the system needs to be challenged.
Yes.
And, the guidelines of physical activity are quite generic in terms of the moderate to vigorous physical. It doesn't say that moderate to vigorous physical activity has to be cycling or running. It can be dance. So the key point really is that as a population, too few people are doing any of those things, as indicated.
You should get everybody doing something. That's the whole thing, I think.
I think it's a beautiful message. Beautiful message. I'm going to direct one in your direction, Stephen, because there was a couple of questions about resistance training in the chat and about strength building exercise. So a few people were curious about what's strength training, how that changed during aging, and what you might be able to inform us about that.
So your strength training actually becomes a more important part as we get older, because ultimately we are progressively losing muscle. The most effective way to maintain muscle is to undertake resistance exercise. is an older person as adaptable to a younger person when you give them the same type of exercise, at least relatively speaking? And the answer seems to be no. And that we have this concept of anabolic resistance. So the muscle itself does not stimulate muscle protein synthesis via exercise or through nutritional pathways to the same extent. And that seems to be an age-related issue. That's not to say that you don't get a lot of functional benefits from doing it, because half of the battle of the resistance type exercise is not just the growth of the muscle, but it's in all of the motor pathways that activate the muscle. So yes, muscle size is important, but it's also the ability to switch on that muscle, which you are also training. So the exercise bit is really important because it's a holistic, integrative phenomenon, not just a let's put some electrodes on a muscle and stimulate it and see if it will grow. You're not getting the integrative approach. But as we do get older, many people who are perhaps still very fit, that as they reach certain ages, are unable to have or perform simple tasks such as getting out of a chair because they just lack that core strength. And the best way of overcoming that is to do resistance type exercise, ultimately.
I'm going to throw a fun question at both of you. That's to play on a few different questions I'm seeing in the chat at the moment. We have had a theme around dance and health tonight as a type of exercise. Do either of you have a favorite type of dance with potentially for health and well-being at the end of that answer? And I'm curious to get an answer from both of you on that one.
My favourite dance that I did on Strictly, because I was introduced to it for the first time, was the Argentine tango, and it was just wonderful to dance, and an awful lot of people enjoy that. But I just like freestyle dancing. It's why I love dad dancing. You know, all the guys who say, I can't dance, I got 2 left feet. My family always say, oh, Dad, sit down, you're embarrassing us. Dad dancing is the most wonderful freedom of expression you could ever possibly see. Anybody, it doesn't matter if you dance and you're not in time with the music, if you're not technically correct, if you're just dancing for the sheer joy of it, it is the best thing you can do. And I say to everyone who says, oh, all the family say, you're embarrassing us, Dad. I say, no, just tell them you are the perfect example of a freedom of expression to show how much you enjoy just doing what is perfectly natural to all of us, an ability we are all born with, which is the ability to move to music.
Before we jump to you, Stephen, for an answer to that one, I just wanted to address that you actually hit a precise question in the chat that I didn't mention about I'm embarrassed by dancing, and the instructor agreed it was embarrassing. What would you suggest? And that's brilliant. Just go for it. It's great fun. Whichever you prefer, go for that.
You should never be embarrassed. You should just do it for yourself. What is it they say? Dance like no one else is watching. To heck with everybody else who thinks it's embarrassing. If you're having fun, that's the most important thing you can be doing. And it's also why it's good for your brain, is because it helps to defeat isolation and loneliness. So that's something that you don't necessarily get from some of the other exercises. But anyway, there's yes, I think all exercise is brilliant for you, but dancing is fun.
Professor Harridge.
Angela's already captured my answer, which of course is dad dancing. But not particularly talented dancer, I have to say. It's not my first choice of exercise, and I think this is
Stephen, you're not going out to win the glitter ball or to get a job at the Royal Ballet, are you? You're just doing it for yourself. So it doesn't matter what other people think, as long as you enjoy it.
I've yet to be invited onto Strictly, so who knows what might ever happen should I have some instruction.
Well, there you
go. But I think it raises an important point, and Angela raises an important point here about the holistic view of exercise programs and the social interaction that people get.
Really important.
And that's really, really, really important. And that's great. Dancing is great. Cycling clubs are great. It's not just the cycling. People meet and make friends by doing other types of exercise. So I think one of the key components is doing something you really enjoy. Mm-hmm. Now, Angela, clearly an advocate for the joys of dancing. Other people enjoy doing other things which are, equally as effective.
But
I think finding what you enjoy doing is the key.
I'm going
Sorry,
to,
did I lose you for a second there?
yeah, I think we lost you for a second. Then I spoke over
Just
you.
do what you
Apologies.
enjoy. I think do what you enjoy. That's really the important take-home point.
I'm going to start to wrap us up, and I'm going to give you all one freebie, if you will, and a question. So if there's one thing you could have said tonight and a question you could have been asked that I didn't ask either of you, what would you say to our wonderful audience of just over 200 people, I think, listening in at the moment? Stephen
Simple
first,
words.
sorry.
Oh, sorry, I jumped in. Simple words, 2 words, be active.
Fantastic. Angela.
It's simple.
Just as Stephen said, do something you enjoy, because if you enjoy whatever you're doing, you're likely to do it for longer. If you go to the gym and hate it, you'll give up after 3 months and it'll be a complete waste and you'll never go back. Do something that you enjoy, but do something. Keep the machine working. And you may not be a Formula One as you were in your teens, your 20s, your 30s, and your 40s, but rather like me, you can be a well-preserved vintage model.
I
You
think if
can
I may
still
just
keep
one more.
going.
I think if I may just one comment. Inactivity kills, and we are declining as we get older. There's no doubt that we are declining, but the point being is, are we optimal for the age that we are at? That's the point. So many people are not and have the capacity to improve their physiology to be on a more optimal trajectory of decline as they age. And that's really the key thing. It's not about reversing aging, it's optimizing the trajectory that you're on.
The point being, Stephen, that if you don't, it means that your lifestyle as you get older becomes restricted, because you can't walk in the way you used to. You can't bend and pick things up. If you fall, you're less likely to be able to get up off the floor. It's by not keeping fit, by not making your muscles work and just thinking in terms of doing something active that enables you to stay relatively fit, you can actually reduce everything that you do in your life. You can reduce your lifestyle, everything about your everyday activity, whether it's walking the dog, playing football with the grandchildren, going out with friends or whatever. And that's, I think, what none of us want to do. We want to age well so that we can be as active as we possibly can be for as long as possible.
I think that's just a really beautiful point to end tonight's talk. I can't give you applause from everyone, so if you'll forgive me giving you a representation of the applause from our audience tonight, which was a fantastic talk from both of you. Thank you very much. I would remind our audience, if you enjoyed tonight, let friends and family know. Feel free to join future public seminars from the British Society for Research on Aging. We've had some really interesting messages tonight and some interesting teasers on future talks and themes that we're going to have coming up as well about other aspects of aging well outside of exercise. So I look forward to those. And that's us for the evening. So thank you again, Professor Harridge, Angela Rippon. Thank you for coming along. Thank you for a really interesting discussion. And I will see the rest of our audience in our next seminar. Have a good evening.
And thank you very much indeed, Bradley. Bye-bye.
Thank you.